know you all were expecting someone way more handsome than me, but Alejandro is in San Francisco, so as his vice chair, I will be chairing today's RDA meeting. Yay! So, welcome, first and foremost, to this month's RDA meeting, our Redevelopment Agency Board meeting. You can always, I welcome everybody from the public that is here in person. You can always join us on WebEx or by watching the City Council's agenda page, Facebook, YouTube, SLC TV, Instagram, I don't know, all of the socials, all of the places that our amazing comms team put together for you to watch us. We are on agenda item A, which is our comments. We begin our meeting with comments to the board. You can also submit written comments to the RDA office via mail at P.O. Box 145476, Salt Lake City, Utah 84114, or by emailing us at council.comments@slcgov.com. You can also call our 24-hour phone line at 801-535-7654. So again, I would like to thank everyone for joining us. Before I start, I would like to remind everyone about the decorum that we hope to have here in our RDA meeting. We appreciate everybody's comments. We appreciate diverse comments. We appreciate everything that people have to say. So we ask that you respect and appreciate other people's comments and give your comments with that same full respect that we have for yours. Taylor Hill on our staff will be calling the names of those who wish to comment. We will call names of people joining on WebEx and in person, based on the order of the registration or received comment cards. When it is your turn to speak, Taylor will announce your name. Or for people in WebEx, she will unmute your line and you may begin. For those in person, please step up to the podium. Once you begin, please state your name and the 2-minute timer will start. With that, Taylor, we will turn the time over to you to introduce our first commenter. Sweet. Then we'll be moving on to general, oh wait, that is, why do we have both of these? Oh, we have B1, the public hearing. That was general comments. Now we're moving on to comments regarding the public hearings. So our first public hearing is B1, the State Street Community Reinvestment Area Budget Amendment. At this time, please tell me that my script is right. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Ben Ludke to give us a brief introduction. Thanks, Ben.
Amending the 20-year consolidated budget is the final step to create the State Street project area. The consolidated budget needs to be updated to reflect several changes. These include the number of taxing entities participating, the 20-year collection period instead of 25, updated property tax increment projections, and interlocal agreement terms that are different than originally requested, among other changes. Note the next item on the agenda is the briefing, as well as the option for the council or for the board to vote. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ben. Taylor, we will turn the time back over to you.
Thank you. Alan Kersley, Business Administrator, Salt Lake City School District. The Salt Lake City School District appreciates the good working relationship we share with the Salt Lake Redevelopment Office and appreciate the work that they do. While we oppose the budget adjustments on the grounds that it diverts additional resources away from our students and disproportionately affects tax receipts of the Salt Lake City School District, we understand that the requested budget adjustments fall within the parameters set forth in our interlocal agreement. With these concerns noted, we recommend moving forward with the budget revisions as presented, and we will continue to work with the Redevelopment Agency on how we may best serve the students and citizens of Salt Lake City.
Thank you. With that, that we need to change this. I need a motion.
Madam Chair, move that we close the public hearing.
Second.
I have a motion by Board Member Mano, a second by Board Member Dugan. Is there any discussion on this? All those in favor? Say
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes 6-0 with Chairperson Bowie being absent. Thank you for everyone here. We are moving on to the redevelopment agency business. Our first item is item C1, which is the State Street Community Reinvestment Area Budget Amendment. And Ben, you're still there. Hi, I'm gonna look to you.
We have RDA staff with a short presentation detailing the various changes I mentioned in the intro to the public hearing.
Excellent. So it looks like we have Lauren and McKenna. Are they joining us? Yay.
Oh, yes, we do have a brief presentation if it's helpful for you all. It was summarized by Ben, but we can just go over it for the benefit of you and the public if that sounds good.
I think that sounds great.
Okay.
We can go ahead and start on the next slide, but I'll just say that notices were mailed to all property owners within the area on February 6th regarding the budget amendment and public hearing, and I did speak to a few people over the phone, just answering questions about the RDA and the project areas, and one public comment was emailed in with the main concerns regarding her tax dollars going to the right places and wanting assurance that safety was a priority, and I was able to reply and but kind of just thinking that that is one of the main priorities of this project area as well, so I hope it attempts to do justice to address her issues. On the next slide, this was briefed before last month, but just for the benefit of the general public, the interlocal agreements have been finalized with each participating entity, including the city and the county and the school district. State code does require that we amend the budget that was originally included as part of the CRA plan adopted in 2018 to reflect the final terms of each interlocal agreement. So at a high level, the major changes are the reduced collection period, fewer taxing entity participation, updated tax increment projections to reflect denser, transit-oriented development that we anticipate in the area. On the next slide, it's just giving a brief overview of the current budget compared to the budget as amended, and the total tax increment that we would anticipate that these three taxing entities will generate in the State Street CRA, which is projected around approximately $140 million. On the next slide, it shows that of that total, the RDA is authorized to receive up to approximately $95 million if it's generated that way. So then on the final slide, I was just going to remind, but you already know that that the state code requires that the board holds a public hearing regarding the proposed amendments before considering their adoption. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Is there any discussion on this item?
I have a question,
Board Member
Madam Chair.
Valdemoros?
I know part of the State Street, we have a big block out there on 8th South and State Street that might, I think the current property owner is a nonprofit organization. Can you hear me? Sorry. On the State Street project on 8th South and State Street, there's a big chunk of land that it's actually owned by the current owner is a nonprofit organization. And I was wondering how that affects, it will be if it's going to take a big chunk out of our projected tax increment, if we have contemplated that, or I don't know.
The projection doesn't contemplate that specific development because I'm not aware what will be developed there.
Okay.
But so our projection doesn't contemplate that because it's kind of
okay.
based on highest and best use of each parcel and not actual development. Because we didn't have that at the time the analysis was done.
Okay.
Is that helpful?
Madam Chair?
Yeah, go ahead. Oh, not me. Sorry. Thank you. Thank
Maybe
you,
to
Lauren.
expound on Board Member Valdemoros's question, it was my understanding that like state entities and public, like school districts and things, do not pay property taxes, but I thought nonprofits still did. Is that true, or am I incorrect on that? Nonprofits don't?
I'm going to turn this over to Jen.
Typically, they do not. So, for example, if a hospital is run by a nonprofit, it would not pay property
Not
taxes.
pay any property taxes.
Right. There are some agreements where, depending on the makeup of their corporation, they may pay a portion of property taxes. So there is a spectrum between 0 and 100% tax exempt. And so in some cases, properties are, 25% taxable or that kind of thing. So, yeah.
That answers the question.
Oh,
Thank you.
great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other discussion by board members? I'm going to say something really quickly that I truly appreciate the school district being here. And I know that this project area and sort of the way that we've looked at RDA project areas have kind of evolved in a lot of different senses. But I truly believe that the way that our RDA runs and the things that we do with our project areas really focuses on trying to benefit everyone as a whole. And we have to play with all the players and kind of have to play by different rules sometimes. But at the end of the day, I truly believe in the mission and values that we as a Salt Lake City RDA have put forth in what we want to do, not just for project areas, but for the city as a whole. And it is truly about benefiting each and every member of our community. I don't take it lightly when I say a goal of ours is to live, work, and play in Salt Lake City. And I want to thank RDA staff and Jen Bruno. I've done this like 8 times now, and I'm going to keep doing it. But working on this project has been a labor of love, a love of labor, hate love, all of the things that combine the things. But truly want to thank the RDA staff for their work, their dedication, their perseverance, and again, Jen Bruno for educating me, for helping to sit in meetings where I was going to lose my mind and talking all of us off the ledge and really trying to be partnerships. And I want to continue that partnership with the district, with the county, and work forward truly to create project areas that make sense and that do what every single person in this room have the passion and dedication to do. So thank you to all of you for being here. Thank you to the RDA staff. Thank you to Council Jen and Council Ben. And with that, I will look for a motion.
Madam Chair, I move that we approve the resolution.
Second.
I have a motion by Board Member Mono, a second by Board Member Valdemoros. Any further discussion on this? Seeing none, I will, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes 6-0. Thank you. There's a voice from above. Oh, hi, Ale. Do you want to take over?
I think he wanted to vote.
Oh, did you want to vote?
I heard him say 7-0, but maybe I heard things.
Okay. It's 7-0. Cindy Lou's got you down. With that, we will move on to C2, which is informational briefing, which is the proposed housing development funding priorities for fiscal year 2023 and 2024. We have Allison Rowland, Danny Waltz, Tracy Tran, Lauren Parisi, and I turn the time over to all of you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just accusing the director of trying to get the first crack at this by sitting to my left. So I appreciate you calling on me.
I concede my time.
So this discussion is the fiscal year 2024 Housing Development Funding Strategy. It's the first discussion with RDA staff on the proposed fiscal year 2024 Housing Development Funding Strategy, which focuses on annual housing priorities as well as housing activities. There will be another step where they speak more about the budget and the allocations that the board can consider. And that in April, they will include preliminary budget estimates and specific proposals for using the funds. If this all seems a little bit new, it's because it is. These policies were adopted by the board in 2021, so this is only really the third time that the board has been through this. I do want to clarify that the board will approve, needs to approve, both the amount of annual RDA revenue to be allocated among the 4 housing funds, which are, of course, the primary housing fund, secondary housing fund, housing development loan fund, and the West Side Community Initiative, and that the board also will approve the specific funding allocations among the housing activities. So these are things like emergency gap funding or property acquisition. So this is all within your discretion on how you would like to deploy these resources. And these decisions are part of the RDA's annual budget process. 3 other prerogatives that the RDA board has before I turn it over to RDA staff. One is that you can make policy changes among adopted housing activities or budget allocations at any time during the year. So deciding these things now doesn't mean you can't change them later, again, by a vote of the board. You can also review and consider each specific loan project proposal before it may be approved for funding. Sorry, you do review and consider each one before it's approved. And then you can also suspend any adopted policies under special circumstances for a specific project proposal. So these are guidelines, but they are flexible according to the board's discretion. And I will pass it over to whoever wants to speak next.
I'll give it a go to start. We do have a few slides, if we could pull those up. Alrighty, so before we dive into this year's annual housing development funding strategy proposal, I'd like to provide you all with some background information regarding the RDA's housing policies and funds, housing goals, and current housing data. So if we could go to the first slide. So to begin, the RDA's Housing Allocation Funds Policy, which, as Allison mentioned, was adopted in 2021, establishes the RDA's 4 housing funds that you see here, including the Primary Housing Fund, Secondary Housing Fund, Housing Development Fund, and West Side Community Initiative Fund. Each of these funds have unique funding sources, eligible uses, and policy priorities, which I will review in a moment. The Housing Funds Allocation Policy also dictates that prior to the annual budget process, the RDA Board of Directors adopts a housing development funding strategy, which we are here to do today, or to discuss today, rather. And this is made up of 3 major components, including the proposed amount of revenue to be allocated to each of the 4 housing funds, and we hope to bring you preliminary revenue projections at next month's meeting, which ultimately will be approved as a part of the RDA's budget. 2, annual housing priorities for the upcoming fiscal year. These priorities must be, which we will bring back to you all next month. And 3, annual housing activities for the upcoming fiscal year. Funding for specific activities will ultimately be approved as line items within the RDA's budget. So those are the 3 components of this strategy. Today's conversation will be focused on determining your housing priorities and activities for the upcoming fiscal year. And then this information will then guide those funding allocations to be brought back for your approval. Next slide. So the current balance of each of these 4 housing funds was included in your board memo. And again, we hope to bring projections next month. We also thought it might be helpful to break down the sources of these housing funds in a bit more detail. So the primary housing fund is sourced by tax increment required by state code to be spent on citywide affordable housing projects in each project area. For example, state code requires that at least 10% of tax increment from the State Street project area goes to citywide affordable housing. The secondary housing fund is sourced by additional tax increment that the RDA decides to allocate to housing above and beyond that state mandate. The Housing Development Fund is sourced by sales tax revenue, like Funding Our Future dollars, in addition to other sources, and is used primarily for the RDA's Housing Development Loan Program. And then finally, the Westside Community Initiative Fund is sourced by Inland Port Housing Funds, in addition to other sources. So those are our 4 funds. Next slide, please. We also wanted to clarify that the Westside Community Initiative Fund is, of course, a fund, and it's not a program. Unique to the Westside Community Initiative Fund, these dollars must be spent west of I-15 to accomplish 6 policy objectives that the board adopted in early 2022, and those include mitigating impacts from inland port development, allowing for the RDA to maintain ownership of land to ensure long-term community uses, creating opportunities for revenue generation that can be then reinvested back into the West Side community, mitigating gentrification and displacement, promoting wealth building for low to moderate income households through home ownership and shared equity, and finally, facilitating housing and mixed-use projects. So there's a variety of objectives associated with this fund. And although these objectives do promote home ownership and shared equity models of development, the Westside Community Initiative is not a land trust. Additionally, RDA staff is working to bring the board a land acquisition proposal on the city's west side where many of these objectives could be carried out. So that's something to come. Next slide. To guide this year's funding proposal, staff has reviewed current housing data as well as city housing goals. Looking at the data, much of which was highlighted in Housing Stability's Housing SLC Key Findings Report, Salt Lake City's median home value is approximately $459,000, which is much higher than the national average of $281,000, perhaps making the case for increased ownership products. The majority of Salt Lake City residents are renters, again highlighting the need for ownership options and removing initial barriers to home ownership. Close to 45% of Salt Lake City's 90,000 households are considered low income or earn less than 80% of the area median income, highlighting continued need for affordable and deeply affordable deed-restricted units. And finally, there's a mismatch between housing types the housing market is producing and the needs of the community, creating a total affordable unit gap of approximately 16,000 units. Next slide, please. So reviewing the city's many housing goals, the mayor has pointed to the adoption of Housing SLC and Thriving in Place within her 2023 goals. She also encouraged more innovative housing solutions to housing insecurity, such as accessory dwelling units. Both Housing SLC and Thriving in Place, to be presented to the board soon, highlight the need for more housing stock in general, but especially deeply affordable units. Thriving in Place encourages helping tenants become owners, investing in acquisition of land for affordable housing, creating more housing choices like missing middle products, and investing in community ownership. The RDA's benchmarks, or livability benchmarks rather, adopted by the board also encourage ownership, housing for everyone, such as families and people with disabilities, and also unique housing types to serve different populations. And finally, the city's West Side Master Plan promotes the construction of accessory dwelling units on the west side as a way to protect and invest in single-family neighborhoods. So we really looked at this data and these goals to evaluate our priorities and activities for the year. And with that, I'll turn it over to Tracy.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So before we dive into the recommendations for this year's housing priorities and activities, we wanted to give a recap of the priorities, activities, and outcomes of fiscal year 23. Last year, the board approved 4 housing priorities, which included affordable home ownership, family housing, defined as units with 3 or more bedrooms, deeply affordable housing, which is defined as units for those earning 40% AMI and below, and missing middle housing. The activities associated with carrying out these priorities included shared equity model, the Housing Development Loan Program, ADU assistance, and land acquisition. During fiscal year 23, staff researched and compiled information on shared equity programs to better understand how this could be carried out in the RDA. Through the Housing Development Loan Program, the board directed staff to make either family-size housing or deeply affordable housing a threshold requirement for the Housing Development Loan Program. And approximately $10.8 million was allocated to 7 projects last year, funding a total of 934 units, with 189 of those as affordable family-size units, and 516 of those units as deeply affordable. In regards to the ADU assistance, staff convened an ADU task force within the city late in the summer this year. Staff also briefed the board in October, and staff is currently in process of drafting an RFQ to determine partners and program ideas for ADU financing in the 9-line project area. And lastly, RDA staff continues to seek opportunities to acquire land to carry out many of these housing goals. Next slide, please. So for this upcoming fiscal year, based on the housing data that Lauren went over and the mayor's goals, the anticipated goals within the city's updated housing plan, the RDA's livability benchmarks, and the ongoing work from this fiscal year, RDA staff is recommending to keep these priorities basically the same as fiscal year 23. Staff has proposed 4 housing priorities that we will focus on for your consideration. These include wealth building opportunity, which would support wealth building opportunities for low to moderate income individuals and families. Affordable family housing, again defined as 3 or more bedrooms. Deeply affordable housing, defined as those who earn 40% of the 40% AMI and below, and missing middle housing, which is categorized as multifamily housing types or clustered housing types that are compatible in scale with single-family neighborhoods, like fourplexes, townhomes, ADUs. So one thing we wanted to note is that we renamed the homeownership priority from last year to wealth building opportunity, since this encompasses a broader range of not only homeownership, but also various shared equity models. The priority would support different forms of wealth building opportunities for low to moderate income households, and could be achieved through different pathways such as homeownership, supplemental income opportunities, stipends for rents, community land trusts, and co-ops. Establishing these priorities are the first step in the housing funding strategy process that will guide what programs you all choose to fund. So you may wish to discuss whether you are in alignment with these proposed priorities or wish to remove or replace something. Please.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a quick question here. And again, board members always, you all know how I run my meetings. Feel free to jump in whenever. So the wealth building opportunity bucket sounds like similar language to what we heard from Hand yesterday or last week about the perpetual housing fund. Is this the same thing? Is it different? Are we running? Talk to me, because that was the same language that we heard during the brief of the perpetual housing fund, was to create wealth building opportunities. So as you all know, one of my things is about streamlining, and why are we creating 2 of the same thing? So
I think we are trying to achieve the goal of wealth building, and from what I understand of that model, the perpetual housing fund, that is something that could fit under this bucket.
So does it mean any money that goes into Hand is coming over to RDA? How, or RDA's like creating the model, and then like I feel a little confused.
No, it's a great question, and I think as Tracy was saying, one of the reasons we changed the home ownership to be wealth building is so that it can incorporate either home ownership, a perpetual housing fund type model or projects that incorporate that, shared equity models. We're seeing and hearing some of these multiple proposals coming, not just from the one that is ultimately going to be transmitted to you as the city council, but also from other housing providers. So we wanted to broaden that within our own strategy, and as we put money out the door, it can cover all of the options. To your specific point on what is being discussed with the administration, that is forthcoming as far as a transmittal, and I think those conversations are happening with the administration of how we as a city receive that and what is the role between housing stability or the RDA or who is ultimately going to be involved in that. And I think those questions will hopefully have better answers when that transmittal comes to you and that discussion happens on the city council side. What we're doing today is just providing for that opportunity.
Great.
Thanks, Tracy.
Yeah, next slide, please. So to facilitate these housing priorities, staff is proposing these 4 housing activities listed here that could potentially be funded this year. Again, these are very similar to last year's, and that includes an equity building model, housing development loan program, accessory dwelling unit partnership, and land acquisition and disposition. So with the equity building model, this activity was renamed from shared equity model to an equity building model to encompass a greater range of ways to achieve equity building. So that could include homeownership, supplemental income opportunities, stipends for rents, and other kind of shared equity models. So I think the one that's a lot of people are familiar with is a community land trust. That's one example, but that is not the only example of shared equity. So with the primary goal of removing barriers to wealth building and creating generational wealth, through this activity, the RDA will release a competitive Notice of Funding Availability, or a NOFA, to support external programs and or developments that build equity for low to moderate income individuals and families. Guidelines with funding objectives will be released in conjunction with this NOFA, and proposals will be reviewed on a competitive basis. The next item is what you should be very familiar with, is our housing development loan program, so we'll use this program to release a competitive NOFA for developers seeking gap financing for their affordable housing developments. The next item is the ADU partnership. ADUs are a form of missing middle housing that can add discrete density to single-family homes and could potentially have a significant impact on Salt Lake City's overall housing supply. In addition, progress has been made on developing an ADU financial assistance program in the 9 Line project area. RDA staff will release a request for qualifications to solicit a partner to develop an ADU financial assistance program in the 9 Line project area. ADUs provide missing middle housing and can support wealth building by supplementing mortgage payments and increasing income and property values. And the last item is the land acquisition and disposition, which is an important housing activity and will be used to target multiple priorities, including wealth building opportunities, family housing, and missing middle housing. We can achieve the housing priorities by releasing an RFP, or a request for proposals, where we can request specific priorities to be incorporated within a development dependent on the needs of a given area. And the next slide, please.
Madam Chair, can I?
Please.
When we say on that previous slide, equity building models, are we still strictly speaking in a traditional equity through owning a structure or a housing unit, or are we talking about community wealth development as is emerging in the literature right now, things like occupant equity and community investment and community stakeholder equity?
Yeah, so it's a broader, it's kind of incorporates all of those different ideas. So from our research over the last year, we've found that there are a lot of different methods of achieving
so we could
equity
potentially
building.
be talking about like a community investment trust kind of thing?
But I think potentially, I think that's definitely a
Kensington Corridor in Philadelphia and the CIT in Portland I'm obsessed with them right now. So I would love to see things like that implemented here.
Yeah, we can definitely look into that. I think that was the idea, because there are all sorts of these new ideas out there that isn't just traditional home ownership, and even like support of ADUs that allows for supplemental income and equity. So there's so many ideas out there that hopefully this is broad enough to support.
Anyone else on this?
All right.
Keep going, Tracy.
Thank you. Next slide. Almost done. All right. So similar to previous years, RDA staff will continue to utilize the RDA's Housing Development Loan Program, and we'll use the RDA's benchmarks to allow for interest rate reductions through the HDLP. So these include reductions for projects that incorporate transportation opportunities, neighborhood safety, preservation, et cetera. In order to target 2 of the housing priorities as part of the competitive NOFA, the board may consider requiring deeply affordable and/or family housing as a threshold again for this upcoming fiscal year, where at least 10% of the units would need to be deeply affordable or affordable family-size units. So last year was the first time we had a threshold requirement, and I think when we initially had talked through it, we were unsure of how successful or if developers would come with projects that would meet that, and I would say we did not have any trouble getting developers to meet those thresholds. So next slide.
You didn't have any problems getting developers to meet that threshold? Is that what you said?
Yes.
Sorry, I was thinking about coffee when you said that, so.
Yes, that's
Perfect.
accurate.
Well,
So we
that's
had
good. That's
quite a
good
bit
news.
we had quite a bit of applicants through the last Housing Development Loan Program cycle. This matrix was created to help illustrate the proposed housing activities that may be able to facilitate more than one of the housing priorities. For example, missing middle housing can be accomplished through an ADU partnership, but it also could be acquired specifically for the development of missing middle type housing. So this kind of shows how we can meet these priorities with a variety of these activities. Let's see, next slide, please. And this slide really summarizes the components of our fiscal year 24 annual housing funding strategy kind of recommendation. To summarize, we're hoping to understand from the board if you are in alignment with the annual housing priorities and subsequent activities as proposed. The board may also want to provide feedback regarding the deeply affordable housing and/or family housing as a threshold in this year's Housing Development Loan Program, NOFA. Next slide, please. So in terms of next steps, the RDA board will consider the approval of fiscal year 24 housing priorities at their April meeting, and the priorities will be approved via resolution. The projected housing fund balances and proposed allocations to the housing activities will be brought to the board with the budget presentation in May, but we do anticipate if we do receive them earlier, we will share what information we do have in April. Housing activities are approved as part of the RDA budget approval. And at this time, we'd be happy to answer any questions or obtain any feedback from the board regarding the recommended priorities and activities for fiscal year 24.
Thank you so much for that. Board members, Board Member Valdemoros.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, guys. This is awesome. I'm super thrilled to see that we're following some of the things that we've done in the past that have worked for us, and it seems like we can make them work even further. And I think just to illustrate how a few years ago we decided that family housing was very important for Salt Lake City, and that we were going to do everything we can in our power to promote that, to make that a priority when we talk to developers. And that's something that we, at least me when I was chair, and I think the whole board, made the clear connection why the school district participation is so important.
Mm-hmm.
And because we are interested, we want to support the school district because their support to us. And so I hope this, what is being said and how we're moving forward, how we're using our dollars is, it's clear that that's what we want. We want to support families with children and that they can stay in the city and live here and, live close by their school. So having that said, I'm moving on to the ADU program that you might be thinking about. Can you expand a little bit more so that, because we're talking ADUs this last 3 weeks as council, just to see how that program or what you guys are thinking, how we can make the connection as well with the council legislative and work that we're doing. So.
And Board Member Valdemoros, before you answer that, can you take us back to why you came up with this? Because it seems like when you come up with a comprehensive ADU plan, it probably had something to do with the people sitting up here. So it may be a little reminder of that, and then just as some background, because there has been a lot of that discussion, and then to that how it's going to work with
what we're trying to do. But before that, can I answer before, to see if I remember, the last thing I remember that we talked ADUs with the RDA was to, before any of the things that we're reviewing as council, we were thinking that the 9 line could be, it had enough single-family homes there that we could potentially help those, because our program or our ordinance is so complicated. So maybe we start helping people with technicalities, like what does it mean to be, to have a conditional use, and how do you connect the sewage? Do we have a pre-approved ADU that we could help people in the 9 line? I think that's as far as I remember. It may have evolved, but that's what I remember.
Oh, that's great. And again, I think it's a good, if we can do a little refresher there just for the public and for everybody else of where this came from. I wrote down, it was like, oh, it almost seems like this body asked for a comprehensive ADU financing assistance program. So maybe a little of that background would be helpful.
Yeah, so it came from a lot of different places, including you all, and our city housing plans, just master plans in general, supports ADUs especially as a tool to prevent displacement. And as Councilmember Valdemoris, you were talking about specifically in our 9 line project area, there is a large percentage of single family housing. So that's where we wanted to start this pilot program for ADUs. As we do other types of work in the project area, we want to be mindful of trying to prevent displacement and also trying to promote wealth building with this tool as well. And then one other, I think, important thing to note is Salt Lake County also asked for this program to be established in the 9 line. And it's actually a part of their interlocal agreement that we do establish this financing program. And you're talking about this interdisciplinary type of program, because, our role in the RDA is kind of ADU financing for construction, but there's so much more that goes into supporting ADUs. For example, those pre-approved plans, helping residents through the permit process. And so it's kind of become this more all-encompassing program. But our main goal at the RDA is to support ADU financing for construction. And then we realized that there's all these different components to really make for a successful ADU program. And so that's really why we're looking for a partner to help us implement those other pieces that we don't necessarily work on outside of development. So I hope that gives you a little bit of background.
Board Member Mano.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. I appreciate that. I think this is the tools that we can create in order to make ADUs do the things that we just talked about are very important to, I think, from what I've heard, everybody on the board. My question is, you said in the presentation that we're drafting an RFQ to look for partners to help us create these tools. Can you talk to me a little bit more what are the expertise or the capabilities that we don't have within our own staff and that we're looking for from partners? Because my cynical brain hears that as it's going to take a really long time for anything to be created, because we're going to do an RFQ, we're going to wait for them to respond, we're going to figure out who we're going to choose to partner with, and then those people are going to do something, and then we're going to not like it, so we're going to make them revise it, and then it's going to be multiple years before we have like a program that a homeowner can apply for. Can we help me understand this process and how we can hopefully make it as quick as possible?
Well, we have heard that there's different organizations in the community kind of working on these ideas already, and they kind of have access to individuals looking for affordable opportunities. I think something an organization might be able to do better is, because we are looking to support kind of affordable ADUs potentially, and they could, solicit the right residents that meet that affordable qualification. They could work on like the monitoring, the compliance of those affordable units, pulling in more resources in general, because we have, a certain amount of funding, but that's not enough funding to support multiple ADUs. I wish Austin was up here because he's working on the ADU program.
It's okay too. Let me, if I may, real quick. Austin, you don't have to come. You're not in the hot seat yet. And the reason is because this is an overview of the RDA priorities. And we have had about 1 million hours of ADU discussions, and we'll continue having that in our council meeting. And I want to make sure there is space for that. But these priorities came out of 2 to 3 years ago of our mission and our values, and then really what we had asked the RDA to do 2 years ago was say, based on our mission and values and these 20 priorities that we all have, what are we going to focus on in the budget, right? And that's what this discussion is intended to be, is what is that overview of those 4 to 5 priorities that you have heard from us over the last year of like, hey, this is what we think you're saying. Let us know if we're even on point at all, so that we can start to look at our budget and say, we know these are the priorities of the RDA board. And if I'm wrong, somebody tell me I'm wrong, because I'm okay with that. But this is what I believe the intent of this discussion was, is not to go down the rabbit hole of ADUs yet. Right? I think that this program is great. It's what we asked you to do, and that will be there eventually. But I would challenge our board members to step above that a little bit and say, this is an overview of what really are, if we go back to the mission and values that the RDA has and that list of 20 priorities, what are our priorities for this year? What are we going to focus our budget on this year? Because I think that's what we challenged RDA to come and bring us with. And our challenge is to say yes or no, because they're in budget season. Where is our money going? Is it right? And that's kind of, I want to keep us focused up here for a little bit on this one. Councilmember Petro, or Board Member Petro.
Okay, I have a compound question. So, we described missing middle according to the stock, not according to the people who would be inhabiting it. My goal with missing middle is to make sure teachers, police, people who are making good incomes but currently most often blocked out of our housing market have access. I was a little disturbed that their only options as described would be potentially quads, or that the likelihood of a single family home seems out of reach for them. But understanding the nature of like land prices, I get how that works, but that seems to conflate with the description of the West Side Community Initiative, because we said it's not a community land trust. However, if that shared equity model is a strategy that allows us to afford a diversified housing stock for that missing middle, are we saying that we've already eliminated that as a possibility? Are you saying you're not limiting yourself to it now? I'm both concerned with, number one, making sure that people who do really dignified and important things in our city have dignified choice when it comes to where they live and aren't boxed into just one sort of housing. And then the second concern I have is that the West Side Community Initiative should have some pretty rigorous guardrails around what it is, and I'm fine with it still being information, but I don't like the idea that we may have already eliminated a shared equity model that could prove to be that vehicle towards those dignified and diversified options. So help me with what I've missed, because that doesn't seem in alignment with what I know about your goals.
I can try to help clarify that second comment, because I reviewed the West Side Community Initiative Fund. And I wanted to clarify that it's not a land trust, it's a fund, but those funds could certainly be used to support a land trust and shared equity models in general. And in fact, that's what we intend to do, but we wanted to just remind you that it's not like an established program yet. So, yeah.
If I may expand on that, if it were a land trust, it feels to me like it would be almost more confined than if we call it a fund.
Exactly,
and,
yeah.
And say this can be used for other things. The key that I remember about the West Side Initiative is that it's meant for all of the things that we want it to do. Development, wealth building, land acquisition if need be, or however that looks. But if it were a land trust, it's almost that we would be more confined.
Which is fine. I just wanted to make sure we hadn't, the way it was phrased sounded almost like it had been eliminated as a possibility. I just wanted clarification on that point.
Excellent. But your first question, I don't know if that got answered.
I would just add to that I think part of the confusion is in early conversations when we talked about the West Side Community Initiative, we did say that things like shared equity and land trust could be part of it. I think with the direction we've received from you as a board within the West Side Community Initiative, with the indication that the strategy is partly for the RDA to buy and hold on to land long-term for the purposes of providing that ongoing affordability, is kind of where we as staff look at it and say we can do everything that a land trust can do, including other options as well, but we're not necessarily looking to set it up as a land trust as much as accomplish the same goals and objectives.
Thank you.
Did you want an answer to your first question that I can't remember now?
Just the diversification of the stock, and not that every teacher, police person, and fire person is going to have to live in a quad if that's not what they choose for themselves.
Yeah, so so the missing middle benchmark that we have is technically it's based more on the form, and it's not specific for like the people or the incomes. But I think what you're saying is very important, because I think that's what we've thought about a lot, and I think we can go back and make sure kind of like workforce housing is kind of we can still accomplish that within these priorities. I can see that still fitting under like a wealth building, because we could target
really love
that.
workforce housing inclusion, and I think particularly for the West Side, where we've recently welcomed in a lot of deeply affordable, that workforce housing is the income diversification that we need to create, that mixed income that's going to create future livelihood in our communities. So I'm very, very interested in workforce housing, particularly for West Side families.
Okay.
Mrs. Chair, may I?
Yes, of course.
And I also had a comment on the workforce housing. I think at some point we talked about that land trust. We were very specific at the time. Just I think it was also for our understanding of where the money was coming from and what was going to be destined for. But obviously, now that you expanded it, it makes sense. I know it's not eliminated, but we talked about that. I'm not sure if you were here, Victoria, or not. Maybe it was James here, but we also talked about the workforce housing, that and how we could also be very strategic in using or designating let's say we went with a land trust, right, and we were going to build housing, that we could designate a percentage of the units for our own police officers and for our own firefighters or maybe teachers that work for Salt Lake City as a strategy for retention, but also because we really want them to live in the city where they work. That was very, very important. And so I'm definitely all in for workforce housing, and definitely that we keep that in mind, that as we have a lot of competition out there in different cities, that us helping our own staff would be really, really important. Thank you.
Thank you, board member. There are other discussions on this proposal? Board Member Dugan, sorry.
Thank you.
Chairperson Bowie, I see you there. So if there's something, and I'm missing you because I'm looking around the room, just like wave your hands or holler or something so that I don't miss you.
So thank you, Madam Chair.
Member
Just
Dugan?
the question on now just transitioning to the selection process we've gone through, and the weighing the selection process and weighing the priorities over the selection process. I know we had some discussions last time about different weights and how that we had some of the higher priorities were missed because of the way that we weighted things. And I'd like to maybe review that again to make sure that our weighting process is accurate for the current times and the current discussion we're having here, and we're not gapping some things here on the weight process of the selection.
And I think that's something, and I, of course, will leave it to Board Chair Bowie, but that might be something that to put on a future agenda or to look at probably sooner rather than later as we come up onto budget session. You'd probably want some amount of direction as to where our priorities are, which leads me to a question. Sorry, board member or board chair Bowie, but Allison, what are our next steps regarding this? This is a first briefing on the priorities. Can you give us a little timeline maybe, and that might help?
Yes, and I hope Tracy and Lauren will correct me if I'm wrong. In April, there will be, so sorry, you'd think it was my first time. In April, this team will come back to talk more specifically, based on the comments you've made today, about what their next steps are. And then the idea is that in case the budget estimates are not ready by April, that those will have to be delayed until May for the RDA session to work on the RDA's budget. So those are the next steps.
And next month, we will have a resolution for you to consider adopting with the 4 proposed housing priorities. So we will have that for you.
And I mean, technically, that resolution could be adopted that day, or it could be postponed if there's some reason, you know, if there's not agreement on what's in there.
Yeah. So,
Madam Chair?
yes. Board member
I
Romano.
think, so trying to stay at the high level, I do agree with these 4 priorities, and I, without getting into the weeds of it, want to say that I'm hopeful that we can figure out the ADU assistance tools more quickly.
Okay.
And perhaps chair and vice chair would put that on a future agenda for us to talk about, because I think I hope that we'll have a chance to give some policy direction and feedback prior to community partners being RFQs and partners being selected and having them be in the driver's seat. I would like at least a chance to have that discussion at some point.
I think that's great. Sorry, board chair Bowie, did you want to say something? I just think, yes, we're supposed to have a resolution in April and a budget in May. So to the extent that we're going to have the details figured out before there is a resolution that this be a priority.
I'm not saying that I need the details before I say that's a priority. I'm saying right now that this is a priority. I'm just putting it out there that I'm worried about the process of an RFQ. It sounds like it might take a long time.
Got it.
So
Okay.
at a future time, even if it's after budget, but soon after budget, hopefully, that we would have, I'm not saying my support for these priorities is contingent upon knowing the details, but I would like to know the details.
Madam Chair, if I may, help answer some of those concerns. We want to have this happen quickly as well. Part of the reason we've put out the RFP the way we have, as far as we could find a partner or we could find a consultant to help us craft the program, is to merge those 2 efforts so that we know if someone does have something that's ready to go, that's an option to proceed, or if it's something where maybe we want to go a different route, then we're getting information and input so that we can create that and develop the right tool. Either way, those responses and the next step as far as either forming a partnership or creating a program or anything will come back to you as a board for discussion, input, and direction on how we want to proceed with this. We share that sense of urgency, so much so that we anticipate putting a request in the budget for next year so that we can start having money ready to go next fiscal year. So once we adopt a program, we're going right into implementation. And then, Madam Chair, as far as following up on Allison's comment, obviously, yes, we'd like to bring a resolution back for the board's consideration. We understand that there may be further discussion that can carry over into the budget as you get into the actual allocations. And always, we're happy to provide any additional information if there's direct questions that you'd like us to come back and speak to. So whatever direction you as chair and vice chair prefer, we can do that. I was waiting for it too.
Board Member Wharton, I saw you put your hand on your microphone earlier. Was there something that you wanted to say at all? I'm not putting you on the spot. I want to give you the chance before I move on. Okay, there was a, Board Chair Bowie, sorry I took over, but that's what your vice chair does. Is there anything I'm turning the time over to you, Board Chair. Thank you, Board Chair. If there's no further discussion, then I'll move on. Oh,
Yeah, just
Board
sorry.
Member Dugan?
So I
Beg
agree
your
with Board Member Mono about the priorities. I like the 4 priorities. Is there a priority amongst those, or are they just all basically equal priorities? And do you need more specificity on that?
If I may, I think one thing to keep in mind is that last year, the affordable housing or just housing, affordable homeownership, yes, and the deeply affordable housing priorities were actually had to be included in any successful in any successful project. So those two sort of do have a higher place above middle, missing middle, and and ADU. So that's something you could consider keeping, leaving, keeping, changing, whatever you prefer.
Right. Because correct. If I'm wrong, we have the wealth building priority, affordable family housing, deeply affordable, and missing middle. Those are the 4 priorities. So those are, I think we are in agreement, those are the 4 priorities. But in the past, we had 2 of them that were kind of carved out we had 2 priorities, upper level and a second tier level.
Threshold and.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
That's the word.
So we haven't kind of given you a decision on that at this point to say change that or not change that. So we need to come back to you probably, because it doesn't sound like we're at that level yet of saying, hey, we need to keep these thresholds, or maybe we adjust those thresholds. So
I believe we can come back to you with the guidelines for the affordable housing NOFA, and we could discuss that weighting and thresholds kind of later. But we just need to know that what are your 4 priorities for the year, because I would also add that the priorities aren't just regarding the affordable housing NOFA, it's regarding all of our programs. So although things like missing middle aren't a threshold for the NOFA, affordable housing NOFA rather, they are an equal priority in the sense that we're trying to implement the ADU program and just promote all the priorities across the board in different things that we do.
Okay, great. So we got the 4 here. We're good to go at this point, and then we can make some adjustments, tweak that at the on the threshold side at a later date. Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Excellent. Any further discussion on this? Great. We look forward to further discussion, as always.
Thank you so much.
But for now, we will be moving on to C3, which is report announcements from the Executive Director. Thank you, Executive Director Mayer, for being here. Is there anything you would like to add? Awesome. Thank you. Report announcements from RDA staff.
No announcements this month. Thank you.
Annie, disappointed. Just kidding. We do have a written briefing. I am assured that all of you have read it. If there are any questions, you can reach out to RDA staff and/or our staff. And then Turning to our consent agenda, we have a board appointment on the consent agenda, and we will just need a motion for that. That's what I did there.
Move for approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
Excellent. I have a motion by Board Member Mano. Did you give it? And a second by Board Member Dugan. Any discussion on this? All those in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? That passes. I'm assuming seven. Did you vote aye?
Aye.
That passes 7-0. And we welcome a new board member to the Redevelopment Advisory Committee. With that, we do not have a closed session right now. And this concludes our RDA meeting. I will turn to our council chair, Council Chair Mano, to ask when you would like us back here.
Why don't we take 10 minutes? Is that enough, Cindy Lou? And then come back at 3:20?
And Board Member Pui, just making sure you know there's a separate link to join the council work session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.